for the first time in our history, India isn't just becoming a young nation, it's becoming an aging nation.
India is infamous for its diabetes crisis, right? In next 20 years or so, we are facing a huge dementia crisis in India. And now in India, we're seeing metabolic dysfunction starting as early as in teenagers. This metabolic syndrome, it starts as an insulin resistance problem, which then manifests itself in various forms of diseases.
Karan, ये worldwide problem है या सिर्फ इंडिया का problem है because we are a vegetarian population?
India is particularly hard hit, I would say. हमारा जो medical system है वो disease को prevent करने के लिए नहीं बना है. हमारा जो medical system है वो disease को treat करने के लिए बना है.
I see most of the Indian households now shifting from samosas and vada pavs and saying they are having oats ka chila. What is your view on that?
अगर आप diabetic हैं या अगर if you have blood sugar related issues or if you're pre-diabetic or insulin resistant, oats is not a free pass. Oats will increase your blood sugar levels.
How do I know if I have insulin resistance?
The surest way to know is to get your
What's the biggest health myth Indians still believe?
I think the biggest myth is that people think that घर का खाना is healthy.
There are thousands of books written on diabetes, yet every year India is only getting sicker. So what did Karan Sarin discover that made him write another one? After a personal health crisis in his own family, he spent years researching a hidden condition that may connect diabetes, heart diseases, obesity, PCOS, and even dementia to one root cause. His conclusion is very simple. By the time most diseases are diagnosed in India, the real problem may have already been there, existing in your body for years together and building day by day. This Doctor's Day, I decided to sit with him to understand how to really prevent diseases and not get pushed into treating them. If you're interested in knowing how metabolic diseases can be reversed, can be stopped, can be controlled, then join me and meet the author of widely read book and appreciated book, Sick Nation by Karan Sarin. Let's go and meet the very awesome author. Hi Karan, welcome to the PVT show. How are you doing today?
Hi Poonam, thank you so much. I'm very well and it's my pleasure. This conversation was long overdue, so I'm very glad to be here.
Thank you for taking out time. I've been meaning to do this conversation ever since your publisher sent this book to me. This is a fabulous cover, fabulous book. There's one beautiful line that says that human mind is very resilient. Bodies could be weak. And then in your own story, when you were at the cross section of faith and science, because of your father's health, then three angels appeared. I want to begin this conversation with that.
Well, I have to give a bit of a context before we talk
Sure.
about Three Angels. So back in 2022, it was 15th of October 2022. I live abroad, I live outside of India, and actually it was the afternoon when I received a call from my mom, and she was calling me from the emergency room of Sir Gangaram Hospital in Delhi. And she actually told me that my father, he had a very massive cardiac arrest, and they were performing CPR on him when she called me actually, and they had already tried twice, but they were not able to revive him. And obviously, she was crying, and she called me. And they were, of course, continuing to attempt the CPR and defib, and at the third attempt, they were able to revive him. But unfortunately, what happened was that it took a lot of time before he could before he could start breathing again, and that actually ended up. So he recovered from the cardiac arrest, but because of that gap, he actually developed a brain injury. A lot of because once our brain stops receiving oxygen and blood, the cells, they start to die, and it's irreparable once brain cells start to die. And he actually, because of that large gap, he suffered a massive brain injury, and then he was in ICU for first 1 month. He was at ICU at the hospital, and then after that, there wasn't any sign of recovery. He was stable, but he was not mentally and consciously there. So doctors told us that look, if you keep him in the ICU, he will develop, ICU. He will catch some infection, and that could be lethal. It's better that you take him home and then you set up an ICU at home, which was very easily said by the doctors back then, but it is not a easy task. But we had no other option, so we brought him back home, and me and my family, we actually operated in ICU. We had a full-time nurse. We operated in ICU from our living room for roughly around 6 months or so. And even after and those were very grueling 6 months. I will not bore you with the details, but to keep someone alive for 6 months who is completely bedridden, and all of his functions are operating through a tube, whether it's breathing or eating or urinating, everything is happening through a tube. It's very difficult, but somehow we were very lucky, and we managed to keep him alive and for 6 months, and still there was no improvement per se. So he was still largely bedridden and largely unconscious, some eye movement here and there, but nothing great. And at that point of time is when the line that you read from my book is when actually some miracles started to happen. uh, our family doctor, who was visiting my father on a weekly visit, he actually told me that there is a drug that is currently under trial in China, and that drug is specifically made to target to reverse the brain damage after a cardiac arrest. And the initial trial data is very strong. And so he gave me this hint, and he told me about this drug. He said, "Look, it is probably very difficult to get it because it's not approved in India. It's just come out of trial in China. So, but you can try your luck, see if you can, if you can get it somehow. That's probably the only hope that we have." So he was the first angel in our life who basically sparked that idea. And then, I'm a fairly determined guy. Once I had that idea, I actually followed it through. I looked at that. I found that trial online. I reached out to 20 authors of that paper. For first, I think, couple of weeks, no one responded. Then there was someone in Sweden who responded, saying that yes, I co-authored the paper, but the research was led by someone in China, and that person was very kind to introduce me to this person in China. And then I reached out to him, and that person turned out to be extremely kind. And he not only managed to walk me through that trial, but he actually sent that actual medicine to us in Delhi, which was I don't know what are the odds and chances of all of this happening. So sometimes life has a strange way of making things happen. And we got that drug, and we actually started administering that drug with my father. And once the course was complete, we started to see some improvement in him. His blood flow improved in his brain, which basically we saw that after a couple of weeks, his some of his brain functions started to return. And another 3-6 months of recovery time. After another 3-6 months of recovery time, he was actually able to stand and walk and talk. So that was quite a remarkable. I mean, he never really gained his full, all his mental functions, but he was all his cognitive functions. But still, he was able to, walk and eat on his own, and go to a restroom and stuff like that. So, which was quite a remarkable thing, and that's what that line in the book refers to.
You were not scared of giving that medicine?
Actually, no, we were quite scared, but we were 6 months into his recovery process, and there was basically zero improvement. He was in a comostatic state, so we had nothing to lose. Human body is meant to move. If you're not moving, then you are I don't know what you are. You're not human anymore. And he was basically in that comostatic state for like first 5 to 6 months. And it's very painful to see your own father in that state, or your husband, or anyone, your family member in that state, or anyone for that matter, right? So
Correct.
so basically, he lost a lot of his brain functions, and the doctors told us there's no chance of recovery. Just take care of him as much as you can. And I don't know, there was no positive hope of a positive outcome. So and doctors had given up completely. So we had nothing to lose. There was this one drug which was specifically being trialed for this exact condition. For a brain function loss after a cardiac event. This is the only drug that that we were aware of that kind of helps in this particular case. So we had nothing to lose, and that's why. And our doctor, our consulting doctor, was also very, he was very good, and he was very confident that it hope it will work, and thankfully it did.
What did the drug do then? Just gave him a little more life for a few years, it was extended.
Well, actually, it gave him back his entire life. I would say, for 6 months he was bedridden, and then after that he was able to. How that drug works is that it actually improves the blood flow in your brain after that injury, and hopefully once the blood flow is restored, some of your brain functions can improve. There will always be some impairment, but still there could be, with the improved blood flow, some functions could perhaps come back to normal, and that's what that drug helped us with. And then over a period of time, it took us about a year or so after that first instance, but he was able to walk with support. He was able to eat on his own. Otherwise we were feeding him with tubes for more than a year.
Yeah.
So that was a so basically, I think that drug played a very key role in giving him his life back. He never returned to his full brain functions ever, but nonetheless, at least he was able to move and eat on his own and breathe on his own.
Do you see yourself as a different Karan now?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Uh, at that time, I was, I think, 40 years old, and I thought that I was invincible, and which I think every 30 and 40-year old feels. Health is not your priority at that point of time. There are other pressing things in life, career, and friends, and other things, and life, and health is not your main focus. So
Yeah.
this particular incident actually changed me completely as a person. And as I mentioned at the beginning, I wouldn't have written this book if that incident didn't happen in my life. It made me think a lot about my own health, but also in general, it made me think about why people are getting sick so much, and especially in a country like India. If you see, there is a it's called metabolic disorders, cardiometabolic disorders. Cardiometabolic disorders. Now, if you look at the top 10 reasons of deaths in India, six of them are because of cardiometabolic disorders, metabolic disorders, basically. And even if you don't look at the data, if you look at your lived experience, look at your families, look at your extended families. I'm pretty sure in every household there will be at least one person who has either diabetes, hypertension, fatty liver, or has had a
Of
cardiac
course.
event, or heart related. It has become so common, and we are so okay with that. But we shouldn't be
Yeah.
okay with that. And what happened with my father made me think about all those things, and not just my own health, which is what also led me to then write this book, Sick Nation, because we are really a sick nation. If you look at the data more closely, these metabolic disorders are at epidemic level. So yes, I think I'm a completely different person after that incident.
I'm happy you brought this point looking at the data. I have digged some data for us for this discussion. And it is fascinating statistics to begin with. And then we will drill down on how your book and your information is going to plug into this thought. So, India has nearly 15 crore people above the age of 60 today, making it one of the largest aging populations in the world. We have to change the verbiage now. We keep saying that we are the youngest, but this is also a reality. By 2030, that number is expected to cross 20 crore people, larger than the entire population of many countries. What's even more fascinating is that the 80 plus population is projected to grow dramatically faster than overall population. So for the first time in our history, India isn't just becoming a young nation, it's becoming an aging nation. Now, from this perspective, I want to start this conversation for all of us to understand from you that the great level of research that you have done, how we can impact the society with your views and your lived experience. So, when you look at aging Indians today, what worries you the most?
That's a great question. Look, India is infamous for its diabetes crisis, right? It is known as the diabetic capital of the world, and I think everyone knows that by now. Uh, but what we don't realize is that in next 20 years or so, we are facing a huge dementia crisis in India. uh, Simply because I don't know if you know this actually, maybe just to give you a bit of a context, neurodegenerative disorders, which also
Yeah.
find their roots in a metabolic disorder. So look, neurodegenerative disorders are typically, disorders which are related to aging and, your brain function. The most common one obviously are dementia and Alzheimer. Uh, I don't know if you know this, but dementia and Alzheimer are now called type 3 diabetes. This is the new clinical term for such neurodegenerative disorders. And like you rightly pointed out, the data, by 2050 we will have a huge number of people who will be, who you would call elderly. So
Yeah.
the today's diabetes crisis by 2050 will turn into a dementia crisis, and we are not talking enough about it. And this is a huge problem, right? And before we talk specifically about elderly, you have to understand that this is something that actually begins at a very early age. And now in India, we're seeing metabolic dysfunction starting as early as in teenagers. The prevalence of metabolic dysfunction in teenagers is going up drastically. This is not something that you suddenly develop. Neurodegenerative disorders are not something that you suddenly develop when you are 60 years old. The foundation was laid in your 20s and 30s, and perhaps even when you were a teenager. So it's a spectrum of problems. So let me just maybe take a step back and actually first talk about what metabolic syndrome is, and why this is such a huge problem. When we talk about metabolic disease, metabolic syndrome, it is actually a cluster of problem. Okay, it's not one single dysfunction. Until few years ago, metabolic syndrome used to be called insulin resistance syndrome, and the reason it was called insulin resistance syndrome is because this metabolic syndrome, it starts as a insulin resistance problem in its early phase. So for the first 10 to 15 years, it starts as an insulin resistance problem, which then manifests itself in various forms of diseases. The
You wanna
most
explain, Karan, sorry, you wanna explain metabolic disorder first? Too
Yeah,
common.
yeah, we are getting there. We're getting there. So I think it will be easier for people to understand once they know how the metabolic disorder or dysfunction manifests, because most of us are
Sure.
familiar with the manifestations. Uh,
Correct.
and we can talk about the underlying dysfunction as well in a second. But essentially, it starts as an insulin resistance problem. And the most insidious nature of this disorder is that for the first 10 to 15 years, it is basically asymptomatic. So you don't even realize that you have an issue. And then 10 to 15 years later, it starts to manifest itself into various diseases. And, it could vary from an individual to individual. But one of the most common manifestation of metabolic syndrome is diabetes. That's a very direct manifestation. And as you know, India is now the diabetes capital of the world. We have massive population of people who are diabetic, and there is an even bigger population of people who are pre-diabetic, and there is perhaps an even bigger population of people who are insulin resistant and they don't even know that they have insulin resistance. So it's a huge, massive problem. But unfortunately, the metabolic dysfunction doesn't stop with diabetes. In some people, it manifests itself in a form of a cardiovascular disorder, so heart related disorders. Even your fertility related disorders, for example, in women, PCOS, which is becoming extremely common, and in men, erectile dysfunction, both of these disorders find their roots in metabolic syndrome. Then you look at obesity, which is growing rapidly in India, and also an adjacent disorder is fatty liver disease, which is also spreading like wildfire. They and then lastly, neurodegenerative disorders like dementia and Alzheimer. All of these disorders are called metabolic dysfunction. Essentially, they all find their roots in a metabolic syndrome, i.e., insulin resistance syndrome. So it's a cluster of a problem. And we in India are facing this at an epidemic level. Like I said earlier, you can look at the data, diabetes capital of the world, roughly 80% people have some form of fatty liver. Obesity prevalence is 40%. It is expected that by 2050, we will have 350 million obese people. That's a huge number. We spoke about PCOS. 20% of women in India have PCOS today. Erectile dysfunction is rising among young men, and also then, like we said, we have an aging population, so a huge number of our population will be, in will be elderly by 2050. So there is a dementia crisis unfolding in couple of decades. So this is a huge problem. It's at the epidemic level, and it all has a common denominator, which is insulin resistance.
What is insulin resistance now? We'll spend 2 minutes on this before I move on to the. Okay, let me just try to plug these two questions in. Fatty liver is a very doctorish language. Whenever you say na fatty liver, only the people who have and now they have to reach a doctor is when the doctor starts using this lingo that they start understanding. Otherwise, what is a fatty liver? For example, I want you to actually explain. You may what the difference between visceral fat and the normal fat, and a very obese looking person could still have good biomarkers inside. You want to throw some light on this concept first for people to understand.
We can certainly talk about that first. But look, like I said, the common denominator among all of this is insulin resistance. So maybe it's important to understand what is insulin resistance before
Sure.
we actually talk about the specific manifestations like fatty liver. Uh, Insulin resistance, simply explained, is that your body becomes, or your organs or your cells, that become resistant to insulin's effect. Okay, that's what simply insulin resistance is. How it typically begins is that, and actually, maybe I should clarify. A lot of people think of insulin as a medicine or a drug that you take if you are type 1 diabetic, which is true. I mean,
Correct.
but that's what most people are familiar with, with what insulin is. But actually, insulin is a hormone that your body is fully capable of produces. And normal human being, your pancreas, they produce insulin all the time, right? Now, why do our pancreas produce insulin? Let's talk about that. We have our body. There is a term called homeostasis, which means that our body has to maintain a certain level of glucose in our body for us to survive, and that typically, the healthy range is between 70 milligrams till 140 milligrams per deciliter of glucose in our running in our bloodstream. And it is very important for our body to tightly regulate this, because if our blood sugar levels go above, that's quite lethal for us. It causes a lot of oxidative stress. It causes a lot of damage. You could actually die of excess blood sugar in your bloodstream. And likewise, if your blood sugar goes too low, that is also extremely problematic. You can, again, in a severe case, you could actually die if your blood sugar goes too low. So our body tries to maintain our blood sugar levels in this very narrow and tightly regulated range. Uh, and that is the job of insulin. Insulin plays a very important role in actually in managing in keeping our blood sugar in check. Now, how our blood sugar goes up is our blood sugar goes up whenever we eat carbohydrates. Our body converts those carbohydrates into glucose. So, for example, when you eat sugar, which is what most people think how blood sugar goes up, but it doesn't stop there. When you also, for example, when you eat rice or roti or fruits or any form of carbohydrates, your body, when it's digesting those carbohydrates, it turns that into glucose. So your blood sugar levels start to go up. Your pancreas detect that your blood sugar levels are going up, and they don't want your blood sugar levels to go too high. So your pancreas will release insulin. The insulin will come out, and the insulin has many roles in our body, but one of its main role is that it brings the blood sugar levels down. So what insulin will do is that insulin will take that excess blood sugar that is circulating in our bloodstream. It will take that to certain tissues. For example, our skeleton muscle, which absorbs 70% of our glucose, and for example, our fat cells. So insulin essentially is required to tell. Insulin's job is that it tells our muscle tissues and fat tissues to open the doors to absorb the excess glucose. So that's how it disposes of the excess glucose. It opens the doors of muscle tissue and fat tissue,
Flush
and,
it out.
well, not flush it out, but your muscle tissues and your fat tissues can either use that excess glucose and convert it into energy, and you can use it if you are, let's say you're
Active.
active, you can use that energy, or it will store for future use. So
As
your in
stored
muscle,
as.
for example, as glycogen. So your muscles have glycogen reserve, and excess glucose running in your bloodstream. Insulin will facilitate an uptake of that in your skeletal muscle. If you are in an active state, your skeletal muscle would use that to create energy. If you're not in an active state, then it will store for future use as glycogen. And a
But you know
similar
what?
concepts
Most of the
happen.
people, got it. Most of the people kind of eat the same kind of food, similar kind of a food, unless they really change their habitat and they most, if you see, are eating. Whenever you ask people that, they are also surprised. I have been eating the same atta roti forever. I have been eating the same food forever. As a child, in my childhood, in my adolescence, maybe my eating outside food has increased, but my food type remains the same. So, what is the logic here? What happens in the body that up until 28, 30, at a typical younger state, we are okay having whatever we are, all the abuses are fine. What really changes in the body that now it is still reacting to the same rotis that you were having, same wheat that you were having, or same rice amount that you were having? What happens?
That's
What
a
is your.
That's a great question. And for that, we have to understand the progression of insulin resistance.
Yes.
Now, what happens is that, like I just explained to you, the function of insulin. Insulin's one of its main jobs is that it makes sure that your blood sugar levels stay within the normal zone. And if your blood sugar levels spike after you eat carbohydrates, it it opens the doors of various tissues for them to actually absorb that excess glucose, and your glucose levels comes down in your bloodstream, and you're fine. So this is the function that we now understand. Now, what happens is that because of our lifestyle habits, this system gets broken down, and let me explain how it gets broken down. So, what happens is that when we are actually, let's take an example. If you take an example of an average person, we most of us, when we get up in the morning, we go and grab some breakfast, right? And if you look in India, the most typical form of breakfast is idli, dosa, paranthas,
Samosa, yeah.
uh, poha, samosa, right? And
Yeah.
if you look, so these are the most commonly eaten breakfast items across India. And if you look, all of them are essentially extremely high in carbohydrates. Now, what happens is that when we eat that breakfast, our blood sugar levels, as that breakfast is digested, our blood sugar levels naturally go up, right? That's the mechanism. Now, our blood sugar levels, when they go up, our pancreas now detect that blood sugar levels are high, insulin is released, and insulin comes out because it has to take care of that excess blood sugar. Okay. Now, typically, blood sugar level take about 2 to 3 hours to normalize. In a healthy people, within 2 hours, your blood sugar levels come down. And if you have some form of metabolic syndrome, or if you're diabetic, then it would also take longer. Now, when insulin is released, insulin also stays out for that long because insulin wants to make sure that your blood sugar comes down. So if your blood sugar levels are high for 2 hours, your insulin will stay high in your body for 2 to 3 hours, just to make sure that there is no excess blood sugar left, right? Now, normally, what is supposed to happen is that then your blood sugar levels come down and your insulin levels also drop. But if you look at our lifestyle very closely, what happens is that we eat that breakfast, we go to our offices, and then, we get a mid morning snack. And for most people, it would be chai
Bananas.
with,
Huh.
yeah, chai, rusk, or biscuits, or, something again, which is again very carbohydrate heavy, right? Now, your blood sugar levels were already high, your insulin levels were already high in your body, and now you have put more carbohydrates in your body. So, what is happening is that your blood sugar, instead of going down, it is staying high, which means that now your insulin levels have to stay high as well. Now comes lunchtime. Okay, your
Yeah.
your insulin levels were already elevated. Now, what is a typical lunch in an Indian household?
Vegetarian,
Rajma
mostly.
chawal.
Huh.
Well, forget about vegetarian and non-vegetarian. It's not about vegetarian
Chapati
and
and
non-vegetarian. It's,
chapati and all carbs, chapati and sabzi or something like
again,
that.
right. So you eat, let's say, rajma chawal, or you eat roti with some sabji, right? Again,
Hmm.
it's a carbohydrate heavy meal. Now, सुबह से दोपहर हो गई है, but our blood sugar level has not come down, our insulin levels have not come down because हम अपनी body में बार बार carbohydrates feed कर रहे हैं, right? So हमने breakfast में खाया, mid morning हमने snack लिया, वो भी carbohydrate heavy था, अब हम lunch कर रहे हैं, that is also typically carbohydrate heavy, right? So we have an elevated level of insulin सुबह से लेके दोपहर तक. अब हम इवनिंग में आते हैं. यूजुअली टिपिकली लोग इवनिंग में स्नैक लेते हैं, विच इज अगेन अ फॉर्म ऑफ अ कार्बोहाइड्रेट लाइक समोसा और पकौड़ाज और whatever, right? Again, so आपने अपनी बॉडी को रेस्ट ही नहीं दिया है, योर ब्लड शुगर लेवल्स आर स्टिल एलिवेटेड. नाउ हम डे के एंड पे आते हैं एंड वी हैव अ डिनर. अगेन इन अ टिपिकल इंडियन हाउस होल्ड, डिनर ऑल्सो कंप्राइजेस चपाती, दाल or some form of sabji, but again chapati is a big component or rice is a big component. तो again आपने दोबारा से कार्बोहाइड्रेट खाए. सो सुबह से लेके रात हो गई है, योर इंसुलिन एंड ब्लड शुगर लेवल्स आर क्रॉनिकली एलिवेटेड, राइट? सो and they have not come down for the entire day. And we don't stop here. We repeat this day in, day out, for pretty much our entire every day for the rest of our life, right? Now what happens is that we find ourselves in a chronically elevated insulin levels, which is called hyperinsulinemia. And जब हम इस स्टेट में होते हैं तो what happens is our cells, they start to become, to preserve themselves, to stay alive, they become resistant to insulin's effect. Because your fat cells have a limited capacity to grow. Your muscle have limited capacity to store glycogen, right? लेकिन अब आप एनर्जी, आप ग्लूकोज, जो भी आप खा रहे हो, कार्बोहाइड्रेट खा रहे हो, जो ग्लूकोज में कन्वर्ट हो रहा है, आप अपनी बॉडी में ग्लूकोज बढ़ाई जा रहे हो. इंसुलिन जो है वो आपका पैनक्रियास रिलीज कर रहा है टू गेट रिड ऑफ दैट, बट देयर इज नो स्टोरेज कैपेसिटी एनीमोर. फैट सेल बहुत ग्रो हो सकता है, बट एट अ सर्टेन पॉइंट ऑफ टाइम अगर वो ग्रो होगा तो वो फट जाएगा, एंड देन इट विल कॉज फर्दर प्रॉब्लम इन योर बॉडी, इन्फ्लेमेशन एंड एवरीथिंग. एंड फैट सेल डजंट वांट टू बर्स्ट. तो फैट सेल क्या करेगा, वो अपने आप को इंसुलिन के इफेक्ट से रेजिस्टेंट बना लेगा. अब जब वो अपने आप को इंसुलिन के इफेक्ट से रेजिस्टेंट बना लेगा, आपकी मसल टिश्यू भी यही करते हैं, तो ये ऑर्गन लेवल पे इंसुलिन रेजिस्टेंस डेवलप होनी स्टार्ट हो जाती है, बिकॉज दे ओनली हैव लिमिटेड कैपेसिटी, राइट? तब क्या होता है कि आपका अब ब्लड शुगर लेवल, अब जो हाई ब्लड शुगर लेवल है वो क्रॉनिकली हाई है. अब वो इंसुलिन आपकी पैनक्रियास प्रोड्यूस कर रहे हैं, लेकिन वो कहीं जा नहीं रहा, सेल्स, योर टिश्यूज आर नॉट टेकिंग इट. बट अगेन हमने क्या बोला कि हाई ब्लड शुगर जो है दैट विल बी लीथल फॉर यू. तो हमारे पैनक्रियास क्या करते हैं, वो उसको कॉम्पनसेट करने के लिए वो एक्स्ट्रा इंसुलिन बनाते हैं. तो उनको लगता है कि ये जो मसल टिश्यूज है या जो फैट सेल्स है, ये जैसे वो पहले एक बाउंसर भेजते थे दरवाजा खोलने के लिए, उनको लगता है कि अब इस एक बाउंसर से तो काम नहीं चल रहा, तो मैं 2-3 बाउंसर भेजता हूँ. तो वो इंसुलिन की प्रोडक्शन बढ़ा देते हैं. इसको, so what that means is that now your body is working really hard to dispose of that excess glucose, right? And आपकी इंसुलिन लेवल्स आर क्रॉनिकली एलिवेटेड. ये जो प्रोसेस है ये 1 या 2 दिन का नहीं है. हमारी बॉडी इस तरीके से हमारे ग्लूकोज को मैनेज कर सकती है फॉर 10 to 15 ईयर्स. ये 10 से 15 साल चलता रहता है. एंड उस समय आपके पास कोई ऑब्वियस सिम्टम नहीं होता, इसीलिए इंसुलिन रेजिस्टेंस को एसिम्प्टोमेटिक बोला जाता है. इट इज एसिम्प्टोमेटिक डिसऑर्डर. फॉर द फर्स्ट 10 to 15 ईयर्स आप अपना ब्लड शुगर टेस्ट कराओगे, आपका ब्लड शुगर नॉर्मल आएगा, लेकिन उस ब्लड शुगर को नॉर्मल लाने के लिए आपकी बॉडी को एक्सेस इंसुलिन पंप करनी पड़ रही है. So you are insulin resistant. After 10 to 15 years, what happens is कि आपके पैनक्रियास भी इवेंचुअली गिव अप कर देते हैं. सो आपके पैनक्रिया में बेटा सेल डिसफंक्शन होना स्टार्ट हो जाता है, बिकॉज दे हैव बीन ओवर प्रोड्यूसिंग फॉर 10 to 15 years, right? After over producing for 10 to 15 years, they will start to develop a dysfunction, and that is called a beta cell dysfunction. That means कि अब उनकी इंसुलिन बनाने की कैपेसिटी पे इफेक्ट आएगा, and that is when the first time आपकी बॉडी आपके शुगर लेवल्स को कंट्रोल में नहीं रख पाएगी. आप अपना ब्लड शुगर टेस्ट कराओगे तो आपका ब्लड शुगर उस समय 100 मिलीग्राम्स पर डेसीलीटर से लेके 125 मिलीग्राम्स के बीच में आएगा, तो आपको प्री डायबिटिक डिक्लेयर कर दिया जाएगा. अगर आप तब भी अपना लाइफस्टाइल चेंज नहीं करोगे तो आप और 5-6 साल निकाल लोगे, बट आफ्टर दैट 5 to 6 years अब आपका बेटा सेल डिसफंक्शन इतना ज़्यादा बढ़ गया है कि अब आपकी जो पैनक्रियास की जो कैपेबिलिटी थी टू प्रोड्यूस इंसुलिन हैज़ बीन कॉम्प्रोमाइज्ड इवन फर्दर, एंड नाउ इट इज़ इवन मोर डिफिकल्ट टू कीप ब्लड शुगर इन चेक. तो 5 साल और निकल जाएंगे, एंड 5 साल के बाद वही खाना जो आप पिछले 15 साल से खा रहे थे, अब जब आप खाओगे, अब आपकी बॉडी उसको ब्लड शुगर को नीचे नहीं ला पाएगी, एंड तो आपका ब्लड शुगर लेवल जो है वो क्रॉनिकली एलिवेटेड रहेंगे, एंड दैट इज व्हेन यू आर डिक्लेयर्ड एज डायबिटिक. So to
Makes sense.
answer your question, why it takes so long is because the progression of insulin resistance is very long. Our body is extremely resilient. It has fail safe mechanisms. तो हम पहले 10 से 15 साल तक हमारे पैनक्रियास दे ट्राई टू ओवर कॉम्पनसेट बाय प्रोड्यूसिंग मोर इंसुलिन. तो इसीलिए
Correct.
वही खाना उस समय आपको आपका ब्लड शुगर नीचे आ जाता था वही खाना खाने के बाद. लेकिन 15 साल के बाद वही खाना जब आप खाते हो तो अब आपका बेटा सेल डिस्फंक्शन इतना ज़्यादा बढ़ चुका है कि वो इंसुलिन रेजिस्टेंस कि वो इंसुलिन केपेबल नहीं है आपकी ब्लड शुगर मैनेज करने के लिए, और इसलिए आपकी ब्लड शुगर क्रॉनिकली एलिवेटेड रहती है और आप डायबिटिक बन जाते हैं.
करण, ये वर्ल्ड वाइड प्रॉब्लम है या सिर्फ इंडिया का प्रॉब्लम है, बिकॉज वी आर अ वेजिटेरियन पॉपुलेशन?
This is a worldwide problem, but India is particularly hard hit, I would say. This is actually not just India. I think जो South Asian जो हमारी community है, we are predisposed to have metabolic syndrome at a much younger age and at a much lower weight. ये
Oh,
हमारे
is it?
जेनेटिक्स है. ये हमारे जेनेटिक्स है. एंड साउथ एंड इसके ऊपर काफ़ी स्टडीज पब्लिश हुई है. काफ़ी स्टडीज साउथ एशियन कम्युनिटी से कंपेयर करी गई यूरोपियन कम्युनिटी से, एंड इट इज़ डिमॉन्स्ट्रेबली प्रूवन एंड देयर इज अ वेरी गुड रीजन फॉर इट. वी कैन टॉक अबाउट इट इफ यू वांट. कि हम लोग साउथ एशियंस वी आर हाईली प्रीडिस्पोज्ड टू मेटाबॉलिक डिसफंक्शन एज कंपेयर टू वेस्टर्न पॉपुलेशन. एंड इसीलिए डायबिटीज़ और अदर मेटाबॉलिक डिसफंक्शन जो मैंने पहले बताए थे उनकी प्रिवेलेंस हमारी कंट्री में इतनी ज़्यादा है.
Interesting. Is there one silent process happening inside millions of Indians today that nobody is paying attention to? Minus this being a South Asian community issue, or is there anything else that you want to pinpoint and it came out very impressively in your study while you were
Yeah,
researching
look,
for your book?
uh, one thing that I completely, it's a pity is that हमारा जो मेडिकल सिस्टम है वो डिजीज़ को प्रिवेंट करने के लिए नहीं बना है. हमारा जो मेडिकल सिस्टम है वो डिजीज़ को ट्रीट करने के लिए बना है. आप हमारे अगर मेडिकल सिस्टम को देखोगे, इनफैक्ट डॉक्टर्स जो आपके ब्लड टेस्ट्स वगैरह भी जो ऑर्डर करते हैं, दे ऑलवेज फोकस ऑन लेट स्टेज मार्कर्स. वो आपका एनुअल ब्लड चेक में आपका HbA1c चेक करेंगे और ब्लड शुगर चेक करेंगे. जैसे कि मैंने आपको अभी समझाया कि आपका ब्लड शुगर लेवल जब बॉडी में एलिवेटेड होगा, उससे पहले 10 से 15 साल का आपको इंसुलिन रेजिस्टेंस का प्रॉब्लम चल रहा था. तो अगर आप इसको वो पहली स्टेज में अगर आप डिटेक्ट कर लें, एंड अगर आप उसको उस स्टेज में इफ़ यू टेक एक्शंस, यू कैन नॉट जस्ट प्रिवेंट, यू कैन रिवर्स दैट डिसफंक्शन. हम वो
Correct.
प्रेशियस 10 से 15 साल हम मिस कर देते हैं बिकॉज हमारा मेडिकल सिस्टम इज कंप्लीटली ऑब्सेस्ड विद ट्रीटिंग द डिजीज रादर देन प्रिवेंटिंग इट. एंड जिस स्केल पे ये प्रॉब्लम इंडिया में बढ़ रही है, आई थिंक इसका इकोनॉमिक बर्डन एंड ह्यूमन कॉस्ट in the next couple of decades will be extremely high, and I don't think sustainable होगा इंडिया में to manage this metabolic dysfunction अगर हम इसी mindset से आगे बढ़ते रहे. We have to think about this proactively and prevent from people to progress to this dysfunction, and that is totally doable. मुझे सबसे ज़्यादा pity यही लगती है कि this is, I won't say it's easily doable, but it is doable if you check for the right markers at the right stage, and अगर आप उसको इंसुलिन रेजिस्टेंस स्टेज पे पकड़ लोगे तो यू कैन एक्चुअली मैनेज इट थ्रू लाइफस्टाइल चेंजेस, सिंपल लाइफस्टाइल चेंजेस. मैंने अपनी किताब में पूरे प्रोटोकॉल्स पब्लिश करे हैं ऑन हाउ यू कैन स्टे मेटाबॉलिकली हेल्दी, एंड अगर आपको मेटाबॉलिक डिसऑर्डर है तो आप उसको कैसे रिवर्स कर सकते हो विद सिंपल लाइफस्टाइल इंटरवेंशंस, नॉट फार्मास्यूटिकल्स. क्योंकि देखिए फार्मास्यूटिकल्स भी जो है दे डोंट एड्रेस द रूट कॉज. आपको मैं एक छोटा सा एग्जांपल देता हूँ. यू लुक एट the medications that you are given to manage glucose, for example, metformin वगैरह. You look at you look at hypertension medication. You look at cholesterol के लिए जो statins जो दी जाती है cholesterol manage करने के लिए. ये सारी medications जो है ये आपको life long के लिए दी जाती है. They are prescribed for your entire life. तो आप एक बार सोचिए कि अगर ये डिसफंक्शन अगर ये प्रॉब्लम को सॉल्व कर रही होती तो आपको सारी लाइफ लेने की क्या जरूरत है?
It's only
This
for
should tell you
maintenance. Yeah.
this should tell you that ये only symptoms को manage करते हैं. These medications, pharmaceuticals जो है they only manage the symptom, and कई लोगों में that's very necessary. मैं ये नहीं कह रहा हूँ कि pharmaceuticals are not good. In fact, in some people it's necessary. But you have to understand that these pharmaceuticals, they are designed to address the symptom, not the root cause. And होता क्या है कि हमें ब्लड शुगर की मेडिसिन दी गई, आप आपने आपको काफ़ी आजकल तो फार्मास्यूटिकल इतने इफेक्टिव है, एंड दे विल कीप योर ब्लड शुगर लो, सो दे आर प्रीटी गुड एट दैट। बट होता क्या है कि
Correct.
अंडरलाइनिंग जो इंसुलिन रेजिस्टेंस का डिस्फंक्शन है वो तो हमने एड्रेस ही नहीं किया, बिकॉज वो जो है वो फार्मास्यूटिकल से एड्रेस नहीं हो सकता, वो सिर्फ लाइफस्टाइल चेंजेस से ही एड्रेस हो सकता है। तो हमने अंडरलाइनिंग डिसऑर्डर को एड्रेस नहीं किया। हमने फार्मास्यूटिकल हमने हमने दवाई ले ली टू मैनेज ब्लड शुगर। वो
Hmm.
4-5 साल तो काम करेगी। 4 पाँच साल के बाद आपका ब्लड शुगर लेवल फिर बढ़ना चालू हो जाएगा। आप डॉक्टर के
Hmm.
पास जाएंगे, आपका डॉक्टर क्या करेगा, वो आपको एक उसकी हायर डोज दे देगा।
Higher dose
सो
देगा.
हर 5-10 साल के बाद आपकी डोज बढ़ती जाएगी। दैट शुड टेल यू कि दिस इज नॉट रियली अ सस्टेनेबल वे ऑफ मैनेजिंग अ मेटाबॉलिक डिस्फंक्शन।
I want to pick your brains on statin. Statin has become like, this is a backdoor conversation. It's become like Combiflam in India.
या
When Combiflam was, demonized because it used to fail for a lot of people, it used to create a lot of gut problems. Then now, three times crocin and you're fine. And likewise, for anything to do with heart, onset of a heart problem, statin is just given to youngsters.
या
Did it came in your research? For example,
या
let's take case in point, if somebody who's very active, doing everything, but of course, age issues. My first question, do you think age has anything to do with lifestyle disorders?
It should not be like that, but unfortunately, it is like that. That is the reality, right? We
Because of
associate
lifestyle
aging
problem?
we associate aging with getting sick. That's become a norm, but it should
Yeah.
not be like that. Aging does not mean that you have to develop these disorders. uh, but of course there is some connection with age, जैसे कि मैंने आपको बताया, like insulin resistance जो है वो asymptomatic है for first 10 to 15 years. So typically it will start in your 20s or maybe in your teenagers, right?
Late
When you're a
30s.
teenager or in 20s. So आप पहले जब आप आपकी 20s and until you are 35, you maybe have insulin resistance and you are completely fine because at that point of time it is asymptomatic. But then
Yeah.
as you get towards the end of your 30s or 40s, it turns into diabetes or pre-diabetes. As you get into 50s, it turns into unfortunately a cardiovascular disorder. As you get into 60s and 70s, it turns into a dementia or any other neurodegenerative disorder. So it is simply because that we are not addressing the root cause. We are, and like I explained, this is a cluster of a problem. So this is on a this all of these disorders, they are part of a metabolic syndrome, and they find their common denominator as insulin resistance. So अगर हम underlying cause को address नहीं करेंगे, so this will continue to manifest in different ways at a different stages of our life, and that's the association with the age. Because पहले 10-15 साल आपकी 20-30s तो ठीक निकल जाते हैं क्योंकि कोई symptom asymptomatic होता है, but as you get
Correct.
into 40s 50s, also we start to become less active during that time. So this these disorders become more prevalent at that's the association with age, but it doesn't have to be like that.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be like that. What's your view on statin? Coming back on the same, if somebody is has been advised to be on statin, right? Somebody who is pretty active, but unfortunately, there are markers now coming in the reports, and he or she is very vigilant about health, and feels that no, when I went to the doctor, look by just looking at my reports, and I can foresee that could be a problem, symptomatic problem of possible heart disease in future, and I want to take step today, the doctor would immediately try to put you, obviously, you don't want to drop dead one day because of cardiac arrest, and this person wants to avoid taking statin. What is the
Yeah,
solution you would advise?
yeah.
Is there a solution?
Of course, of course. Look, statins. Let's maybe talk about that for a second. Statin is perhaps one of the best blockbuster drugs that has come out in last 50-100 years, right? Billions or maybe trillions of dollars worth of statins are sold around the world, right? And I think in some cases it is perhaps needed, and it's a good line of treatment. But my issue with statin is that it should not be your primary line of defense. There are certain studies that will tell you that if you've had a cardiovascular event, and statins are effective to prevent the second event. But if you are young and if you are in your 30s and 40s, and if you are given statin as a primary line of attack or defense, that is not okay. I mean, and especially if as a doctor you have not addressed the lifestyle issues, because underlying cause to hai wo lifestyle se aa raha hai, right? So you are if you don't address that and if you just prescribe a statin, I think as a doctor you are doing an injustice, right? So uh, if you are addressing lifestyle disorders and if you are using statin temporarily to manage, let's say, extremely highly high levels of cholesterol, then maybe it's fine, but it should not be the primary line of defense, in my opinion. uh,
Sure.
and also, if you think, I mean, why statins, right? I mean, statins are given because of a cholesterol high hota, right? But there are also studies that will tell you that total cholesterol is less important. What is more important is the type of cholesterol and the type of and you have to, it's more granular. So there are studies that will show you that people with high cholesterol and high LDL have one of the highest life expectancy. So people, high LDL in certain studies have shown that it is good for longevity. What, so this entire argument कि cholesterol high है इसको नीचे करना is also uh, has its roots in some, there are some flaws in that roots. What matters is the type of cholesterol is more important than how much is the total cholesterol. So for example, typically the bad cholesterol, when you do your lipid, you will see total cholesterol, you will see LDL, you will see HDL, you will see triglycerides.
Correct.
What matters more is the level of triglycerides and HDL in that report than the total cholesterol number. You ideally want your HDL levels, which is called so-called good cholesterol. You want that to be high, and you want triglycerides, which are actually the bad cholesterol, to be as low as possible, because they tell you more about the type of cholesterol rather than the total count. So the obsession with total cholesterol is also misguided in some ways, and I think uh, why we measure that is because कि हमारे पास cholesterol कम करने की medication है through statins. But actually में अगर आप देखें तो HDL and triglycerides, which is perhaps what you should concern yourself with more, is more important to look at. And unfortunately, triglycerides को कम करने के लिए कोई दवाई नहीं है, या HDL को बढ़ाने के लिए कोई दवाई नहीं, वो आप सिर्फ लाइफस्टाइल से कर सकते हो. तो हमारा जो फार्मास्यूटिकल जो इंडस्ट्री है उसने स्पेसिफिकली टोटल कोलेस्ट्रॉल पे इसलिए फोकस किया क्योंकि वहाँ पे दे हैव अ वेरी गुड
Medicine.
patent protected medicine which they can sell to bring it down. But अगर आपको ट्रिग्लिसराइड्स अपने कम करने हैं उसके लिए कोई स्पेसिफिकली मेडिसिन नहीं है. अगर आपको अपने एचडीएल इंप्रूव करने हैं बढ़ाना है उसके लिए कोई स्पेसिफिक मेडिकेशन नहीं है. दैट कैन ओनली हैपन थ्रू लाइफस्टाइल चेंजेस. तो you also have to see we will talk about that, but you have to see that where the incentives are aligned. Pharmaceutical
Yeah.
incentives are aligned with what they can sell, and that's why
Correct.
they have made such a huge deal about total cholesterol. हालांकि आपको स्टडीज ऐसी काफी मिलेंगी जहाँ पे total cholesterol number is less important, and in fact in some cases high cholesterol is actually linked with a higher life expectancy actually.
And a naive person when reaches a doctor and immediately by just seeing one report, the person is given a cholesterol ka goli, and that goes on for forever. I think it is taking the person back,
Yeah,
hundreds of
and I
steps
must
back.
I must add that long-term use of statins will actually make you insulin resistant, which will make your underlying problem even worse. There is published data on that. So, a continuous and a long-term use of statins makes your insulin resistance worse. People who take statins, they are more likely to become diabetic down the line. So, again, it is effective in managing the symptom, but it is actually worsening your underlying root cause.
It's you're getting into a vicious cycle. What would you suggest now that you have done so much of research? I can see. What would you suggest to this person who wants to make changes in the lifestyle and food
Yeah, yeah.
and
So,
is
देखो
given
मैंने
statin immediately?
look, if your doctor has advised you to take statin, then you should listen to your doctor and not to me. But I would suggest that if you are young and if you have not had any cardiovascular event, or if you are if your doctor has chosen this as the first line of defense, then maybe you need to question your doctor. and you should certainly look into making lifestyle changes. And there is scientific proof on lifestyle changes, simple lifestyle changes that will give you a very profound impact. In fact, मैंने अपनी किताब में इसको समझाया है. I call it a big rocks principle. So why I call it a big rocks principle is because देखिए, there are lot of things that you can do to improve your lifestyle that will improve your metabolic health, and it's a long list. But इस long list में से there are three things that will give you the maximum bang for your buck. So for your time invested, and it will give you these three. I call them three big rocks. So imagine करिए कि आपके सामने एक ग्लास जार है, एंड आपको उस ग्लास जार को फिल करना है कुछ बड़े पत्थर से. यू हैव लार्ज रॉक्स, यू हैव पेबल्स एंड यू हैव सैंड. तो आप उस ग्लास जार को फिल करने के दो तरीके हैं. या तो आप उसमें पहले आप सैंड और पेबल्स डाल दीजिए. अगर आप वो डालेंगे तो उसमें बड़े पत्थर रखने की जगह नहीं बचेगी. दूसरा तरीका ये है कि आप बड़े पत्थर पहले डाल दीजिए एंड सैंड उसके बाद डालिए. सैंड नेचुरली उसके आसपास सेटल हो जाएगी. तो एंड जो बड़े बड़े रॉक्स है, ये टाइम मैनेजमेंट प्रिंसिपल है. इसको the big rocks, they represent your bigger priorities, and most important things. तो same principle metabolic health पे भी implement होता है. There are a lot of things that you can do, but there are three things that will give you the most positive impact on your metabolic health. The first is obviously your nutrition. So जैसे कि मैंने आपको बताया, it all starts with what we put in our body. It's metabolic dysfunction. Metabolism means how your body processes energy, right? So what we put in our body has a very big impact. So nutrition is one of the big rocks. The second big rock is your activity or exercise. How you move, how often you move. That has a really big impact on your metabolic health. And the third big rock is managing your stress. And when I say stress, it is combined with sleep, because sleep is a really good way to actually manage your stress, right? So sleep, stress. So these three big rocks will give you the maximum impact. And of course, there are multiple other things. You can, take supplements. You can try to, be in a less polluted place and stuff like that. And all those things will have, some impact on your improving your metabolic health. But agar ye three rocks, if these three big rocks are not in your jar, then anything else doesn't matter.
रुकावट के लिए खेद है. अगर आपको हमारा कंटेंट और कॉन्वर्सेशंस अच्छे लग रहे हैं तो प्लीज लाइक, सब्सक्राइब एंड शेयर करिए अपने फैमिली मेंबर्स और फ्रेंड्स के साथ. थैंक यू सो मच फॉर वाचिंग.
Karan, how do we put some kind of priority to these three? Like, these are fantastic buckets: nutrition, activity, and sleep.
Yeah.
Top priority.
You have
किसको लेकर आए?
nutrition. It all starts with what you put in your body, right? So
in India, nutrition, vegetarian diet, protein, वही हम घूम फिर के वहीं आ जाते हैं बात.
देखिए, ऐसा नहीं है. There is a lot of options, but before we talk about options, let's first understand that nutrition में हमारे problem क्या है. Okay, so there is, हमने अभी starting में we took an example of a normal person's day in life. आपने उसी में देखा कि हमने breakfast, स्नैक्स, लंच, डिनर में हमने देखा कि हमारी डाइट कार्बोहाइड्रेट रिच है. ये खाली हमारा ओपिनियन नहीं है, इसके पीछे डेटा भी है. देयर इज अ स्टडी दैट वाज पब्लिश्ड एक्चुअली कपल ऑफ इयर्स अगो. जिस स्टडी में दे लुक्ड at what Indians eat across all states, and उस स्टडी में they came out with a result that हमारी 60 to 70% of calories जो है वो कार्बोहाइड्रेट से आ रही है. That's that, and then remaining 20-30% is spread between other two macronutrients, which are fats and protein. तो हम मेजॉरिटी जो हम खा रहे हैं वो हम कार्बोहाइड्रेट्स खा रहे हैं. अगर आप न्यूट्रिशनल साइंस की बात करेंगे तो न्यूट्रिशनल साइंस आपको ये बताएगी कि कार्बोहाइड्रेट्स आर द ओनली मैक्रोन्यूट्रिएंट दैट आर नॉन एसेंशियल. आपकी बॉडी को एक्सटर्नली कार्बोहाइड्रेट खाने की एक्चुअली जरूरत नहीं है. मैं ये नहीं कह रहा मत खाओ, बट न्यूट्रिशनल साइंस के हिसाब से जरूरत नहीं है. एंड द अदर टू मैक्रोन्यूट्रिएंट्स जो कि प्रोटीन और फैट्स है, दे आर कंसिडर्ड एसेंशियल. अगर आप वो कंज्यूम एक्सटर्नली नहीं करोगे तो योर बॉडी एक्चुअली विल नॉट सर्वाइव. Protein is obviously required for all the basic, building block. It's a building block of our body, right? So it is essential. You have to consume it from outside. Likewise, fat is a very important source of energy. In fact, बहुत सारे आपके हार्मोन्स जो है वो फैट से ही ओरिजिनेट होते हैं. तो फैट इज ऑल्सो कंसिडर्ड अ एसेंशियल मैक्रोन्यूट्रिएंट. कार्बोहाइड्रेट जो है दैट इज कंसिडर्ड नॉन एसेंशियल. दैट मीन्स कि अगर आप कार्बोहाइड्रेट्स नहीं खाओगे तो यू कैन सर्वाइव. Again, I'm repeating, मैं ये नहीं कह रहा कि आप मत खाओ, but it is a non-essential. ना अब आप सोचिए कि अगर साइंस ये बोलती है दैट दिस इज द ऑर्डर ऑफ इंपॉर्टेंस, प्रोटीन, फैट्स एंड देन कार्बोहाइड्रेट्स आर नॉन एसेंशियल, why is 60 to 70% of our calories coming from a macronutrient which is considered non-essential? And that
Um,
that that is,
Lack of awareness.
yeah,
I
exactly,
want
lack
to
of awareness.
take an example here, Karan. For example, survival movies, how we watch. I think we will understand this better from you because we are at the right spot right now. In survival movies, we see एक ship है उसके अंदर एक आदमी फंस गया है. So let's take an example. On one small boat, not a ship, small boat, two boats, one human being is, I don't know how, but is only getting bread to eat. And the other one is fishing and is able to manage with the fish. Pure protein, pure carbs. What changes will happen in their body with respect to survival and changes in, let's say, if they are on this boat for next 1 month? इसको bread भी
Yeah,
मिल रही है as much as he wants, and this person is also getting the fish as much as he wants.
yeah, that's actually very interesting theory. So okay, let's talk about that. So if you look, the person who is getting bread kya hai? Bread is actually the simplest form of carbohydrate. It's actually
Correct.
pure when your body digests it, it rapidly converts into glucose. आपका blood sugar level shoot करता है, right?
Correct.
On the other hand, अगर आप fish की बात करें, fish जो है, that is not just only protein. Most fish actually has a very good amount of fats in it, healthy fats, natural fats. So fish is actually protein and fats combined. Bread is almost entirely carbohydrate. Okay. Now, what happens is that when we eat, and carbohydrate, by the way, is the most insulinogenic food group out there.
Correct. Correct.
बिकॉज जब हम फैट्स एंड प्रोटीन खाते हैं तो हमारा ब्लड शुगर लेवल, जब हम फैट्स खाते हैं तो बिल्कुल ही नहीं बढ़ता, जब हम प्रोटीन खाते हैं तो थोड़ा सा बढ़ता है, ज़्यादा नहीं बढ़ता, बट एंड सो हमारी बॉडी को इंसुलिन प्रोड्यूस करने की ज़रूरत नहीं पड़ती है. ओके, बिकॉज जब ब्लड शुगर ही नहीं बढ़ रहा तो पैनक्रियाज डोंट डिटेक्ट दैट इज हाई ब्लड शुगर, एंड आवर पैनक्रियाज डोंट नीड टू प्रोड्यूस इंसुलिन एट दैट पॉइंट ऑफ टाइम. सो फैट्स एंड प्रोटीन खाने से हमारी ब्लड शुगर स्टेबल रहता है, हमारे इंसुलिन लेवल स्टेबल रहते हैं. ऑन द अदर हैंड, जब हम सिर्फ ब्रेड खा रहे हैं तो हमारा ब्लड शुगर लेवल एक्सट्रीमली हाई जाता है, बिकॉज इट्स अ सिंपल फॉर्म ऑफ कार्बोहाइड्रेट. इट इमीडिएटली कन्वर्ट्स इनटू ग्लूकोज, व्हिच मींस कि आपकी इंसुलिन लेवल्स जो है वो स्पाइक रहेंगे, राइट. अब हम आपके अगर सिनारियो, बोट वाले सिनारियो पे आए, तो अगर जो इंसान सिर्फ bread खा रहा है, what is happening is that they are spiking their insulin levels all the time, right? Now, what is going to happen is that insulin is, like I said, insulin के multiple roles हैं हमारी body में. One of the roles is that insulin is the only deciding factor in our body कि हम fat को store करेंगे या fat को burn करेंगे. अगर आपकी बॉडी में इंसुलिन लेवल्स हाई हैं तो यू आर इन अ फैट स्टोरेज मोड. अगर आपकी बॉडी में इंसुलिन लेवल लो है तो यू आर इन अ फैट बर्निंग मोड. तो जब आप ब्रेड खा के आप अपना ब्लड शुगर एंड इंसुलिन लेवल स्पाइक कर रहे हैं, तो योर बॉडी, you're sending a signal to your body that we are in a fat storage mode because insulin levels are chronically high, right? So you will actually gain more fat. On the other hand, the person who is only consuming fish is basically eating protein and fats, which means that he has a very stable blood sugar levels, and insulin levels are also very stable, which means that that person will remain in a fat burning mode. So at the end of your 30-day experiment, survive दोनों करेंगे. Most likely the person who was only eating bread will, उनकी insulin sensitivity would have decreased tremendously. They would have gained more fat, and the person who was consuming only fish, they would be extremely insulin sensitive, which is a good thing. They would have lost fat and gained muscle mass. That would most likely be the end outcome of this.
Interesting. I'm thinking now for vegetarian, again, the same question is how would you switch your food? So I think
Yeah.
this brings us to a good conversation now on, are we raising the sickest generation yet? So we started with aging population. Now I want to bring your focus and through some line of questioning, understand that what really younger generation and kids and adolescents, what food habits can be changed so that by the time they are in 30s or 40s, it's a better world for them. So, every parent wants their child to have a better life, of course, but what if modern childhood is making children less healthy? So, my question to you would be, what are the biggest mistakes modern families are making with food?
Yeah. That's a great question. And I before I get there, I just want to mention one thing. हमने न्यूट्रिशन
Sure.
की बात करी. मैंने अपनी किताब में इसके ऊपर काफ़ी डिटेल में लिखा है. बट एक्चुअली जब हम न्यूट्रिशन की बात करते हैं, मेरा एक जनरल न्यूट्रिशन को लेके रूल है. इफ़ यू वांट टू स्टे मेटाबॉलिकली हेल्दी, इट्स अ वेरी सिंपल थिंग. एंड मेरा रूल ये है कि आपको यू हैव टू कंट्रोल योर कार्बोहाइड्रेट्स. अगर आप अपने डाइट से कार्बोहाइड्रेट्स को एलिमिनेट नहीं कर सकते तो एटलीस्ट उनको आप कंट्रोल करिए. सो दैट इज़ द फर्स्ट रूल ऑफ न्यूट्रिशन. द सेकेंड रूल ऑफ न्यूट्रिशन इज कि आपको अपनी डाइट में प्रोटीन को प्रायोरिटाइज करना है. सो प्रोटीन हैज़ टू बी प्रायोरिटाइज. इट हैज़ टू गो अप. एंड द थर्ड रूल ऑफ न्यूट्रिशन इज दैट यू हैव टू इनकॉर्पोरेट गुड फैट्स इन योर डाइट. तो फैट से डरिए मत. ये जो फैट फोबिया पिछले कितनी डेकेड से चल रहा है इज ऑल्सो वेरी अनफाउंडेड. हेल्दी फैट्स को अपनी बॉडी में अपनी अपनी डाइट में इनकॉर्पोरेट करिए. फैट इज अ एक्सीलेंट सोर्स ऑफ एनर्जी एक्चुअली. एंड स्पेशली अगर आप कम कार्बोहाइड्रेट्स खा रहे हैं तो आपकी बॉडी जो है वो ग्लूकोज पे डिपेंड करने की बजाय फैट्स पे डिपेंड करेगी फॉर एज एन एनर्जी सोर्स, which is a really metabolically healthy way of actually processing energy. So सिंपल रूल है कि कार्बोहाइड्रेट्स को कंट्रोल करो, आप प्रोटीन को प्रायोरिटाइज करो एंड फैट्स को इनकॉर्पोरेट करो अपनी डाइट में. नाउ ये लॉजिक जो है ये आप अक्रॉस द बोर्ड किसी भी एज ग्रुप में अप्लाई कर सकते हो. ऑफ कोर्स दिस बिकम्स मोर इम्पॉर्टेंट एज यू ग्रो ओल्डर, बिकॉज जब हम हमारी 40s के बाद हमारा मसल मास डिक्लाइन बहुत रैपिडली इंक्रीज हो जाता है. एंड एट दैट पॉइंट ऑफ टाइम आपको प्रोटीन को प्रायोरिटाइज करना इवन मोर इम्पॉर्टेंट है. सो the importance might shift here and there, but ये जो बेसिक प्रिंसिपल है आप इसको हर एज ग्रुप में अप्लाई कर सकते हो. एंड आई थिंक टीनेज में या अर्ली एज में इसको इनकॉर्पोरेट करना मे बी फिजियोलॉजिकली इतना इंपॉर्टेंट हो या ना हो, बट आई थिंक हैबिट फॉर्मिंग के लिए बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट है. बिकॉज जो आप अपने बच्चों को अर्ली एज में आदत डाल दोगे वो उनके साथ मोस्ट लाइकली लाइफ लॉन्ग रहेगी. सो आई थिंक दैट इज एक्सट्रीमली इंपॉर्टेंट. और आजकल इंडिया में हो क्या रहा है कि एक तो this 10-minute food delivery, it is a great convenience, but at the same time it's also the food that you will get in 10 minutes is not going to be the most nutritious food, right? तो ये तो एक फैक्ट है. एंड सेकेंडली अभी हो क्या रहा है कि हमारी कंट्री में प्रॉस्पेरिटी बहुत आ रही है. जब भी आप देखोगे कोई नेशन प्रॉस्पेरिटी की तरफ जाता है तो वहाँ पे आप देखोगे कि फास्ट फूड की कंजम्पशन यूजुअली बढ़ जाती है. कन्वीनियंस लोग ऑप्टिमाइज करते हैं, टाइम कम होता है, बिजी होते हैं. यूएस वेंट थ्रू दैट इन देयर 60s एंड 70s जब जब प्रोसेस्ड फूड इंक्रीज हुआ. इंडिया में भी अभी वही ट्रेंड पिछले कुछ सालों से या डेकेड से चल रहा है दैट आवर कंजम्पशन ऑफ फास्ट फूड इज गोइंग अप. सो आई थिंक अगर आप अर्ली एज में अपने बच्चों को होल फूड खाने की आदत डालें इंस्टेड ऑफ प्रोसेस्ड फूड. सो एज अ पेरेंट मेरे हिसाब से आपको अपने घर में बैन लगाना चाहिए ऑन ऑल प्रोसेस्ड फूड्स. सो anything
You know how kids are going to hate all parents, Karan.
but anything that comes in
Live out of
in
these
boxes.
Yeah.
I know anything that comes with a barcode in a box or a packet. I think that is something that you should completely eliminate, in my opinion.
Maybe we can ration it out.
Or that, but I think fast food is really unhealthy food to have, because आप देखिए you look at chips or you look at any processed food, what they have done there is that हमारी नेचर में जब कार्बोहाइड्रेट्स आते थे ना तो वो हमेशा आते हैं तो वो हमेशा फाइबर के साथ आते हैं. तो आप अगर देखेंगे फॉर एग्जांपल वेजिटेबल्स फ्रूट्स दे बिलोंग टू कार्बोहाइड्रेट फैमिली. बट जब ये बट ये नेचुरल कार्बोहाइड्रेट्स हैं इनमें आप देखोगे इनमें फाइबर कंटेंट यूजुअली काफ़ी हाई रहता है. तो जितने भी कार्बोहाइड्रेट्स हमें नेचर देता है, या फॉर एग्जांपल इवन व्हीट प्लांट अगर आप देखोगे, राइस हमने उसको काफ़ी मॉडिफाई कर दिया, बट अगर इफ यू गो बैक यू विल सी दैट दे वर वेरी रिच इन फाइबर एंड that's why they are called complex carbs, and it's fine to consume those. But processed food में क्या होता है? Processed food में they strip out all the good things from it, and whatever is left is pure starch. So what you are eating is pure starch, nothing else. It has no nutritional value. It is you look at chips or you look at juices for that matter or anything. So they have juices. Maybe if you see, I mean, it's the worst way to consume fruit, because fruit जब nature हमें देती है तो ऑफ कोर्स उनमें शुगर होती है, ब्लड शुगर गोज अप, बट वो नेचुरल ब्रेक्स के साथ आता है फ्रूट, तो उनमें फाइबर भी होता है, राइट? एंड यू ईट fiber and carbohydrate together, and it gives you a much more moderate blood sugar spike. But जब आप juices पीते हो तो क्या होता है कि उसमें से जितना भी फाइबर था वो तो निकाल लिया. Now what is left is basically pure sugar, right? So that's why आप अगर जूस पीने के बाद ब्लड शुगर टेस्ट करोगे, you will see that your blood sugar will skyrocket. So that is the problem. The processed food is designed to be tasty. It is designed for to make it addictive, and for that, these processed food companies they spend millions to optimize that, and the way they do that is they strip out all the good things from it, and what you eat in the end is basically pure starch, which is not good. So if you can, you should try to eliminate processed food to begin with, especially with youngsters. If you cannot completely eliminate it, then at least, like you said, maybe ration it, or use it more wisely. So but try to eliminate if possible. I think that is where I would start. And then if you
Yeah.
yeah, and then if it's possible, then you teach your kids. हमारे स्कूल में ना सबसे बड़ा प्रॉब्लम ये है कि न्यूट्रिशन के बारे में पढ़ाया नहीं जाता. तो हमें हमें ये सब चीज़ें जो है, ये मैंने अपनी 40s में रिसर्च करके समझी. अगर मुझे बचपन में ये समझाया जाता कि फूड ग्रुप्स क्या है, एंड उसमें से कौन से एसेंशियल है, कौन से नॉन एसेंशियल है, क्या रोल है ईच फूड ग्रुप का, तो मे बी आई वुड हैव been different, and I think a lot of people with information can be different. So I think it's important to teach kids the importance of prioritizing protein, not fearing good fats, in fact incorporating those good fats in their diet. And as a parent, you still have control to on what they're eating, right? So you can still manage this to a large extent. So make sure that when they start their day, ideally they are not eating cereals, which is extremely highly processed breakfast, to begin with. Maybe if possible, give them eggs at the beginning of the day, or give them paneer, or give them something which is more protein oriented, rather than a pure simple starch like cereals, which we now tend to optimize for because they are convenient.
Cereals will fall into complex carb status or no?
Not at all. They are highly processed, and they are perhaps the simplest form of carbs that you can find. All the they will skyrocket your blood sugar a lot.
All the packaging that people see with, on the cereal packaging.
Yeah, yeah. They are.
Is the most healthy way to start the day. I see young mothers having cereals, and it's so easy. My kid is having fruits, milk, and cereals
There is
into
no
it.
there is no fruit in there. It's just artificial flavoring that you would find, and it is probably the worst way to start your day. And breakfast has a very huge importance on our day, and I tell you why. मैंने आपको पहले explain किया, वो इसको actually बोला जाता है blood sugar roller coaster. So breakfast has a very important place in our diet. If you start your day with a carbohydrate or starch rich breakfast, what will happen is that your blood sugar will spike. Okay, your blood sugar will spike, your insulin will spike. Your insulin stays a little bit longer to make sure that blood sugar comes down. तो आपका जो है वो ब्लड शुगर क्रैश करेगा, बिकॉज इट वेंट सो हाई, एंड इंसुलिन आपके पैनक्रियास को खूब सारा इंसुलिन डंप करना, बिकॉज पैनक्रियास को दे आर नॉट सो सोफिस्टिकेटेड कि उनको पता है कि इतना ही इंसुलिन रिलीज करना है टू मैनेज दिस, सो दे एक्चुअली सी अ ह्यूज ब्लड शुगर स्पाइक. Yeah, and your pancreas will dump a huge amount of insulin in your body. What will happen is that huge amount of insulin will then suddenly bring the glucose down, and you will have a crash. So उसको बोलते हैं glucose crash. Now जब glucose crash होगा, what happens is that for temporarily your blood sugar level goes below the normal level, and that is exactly when your body will send you signal that look, मेरा blood sugar नीचे जा रहा है, फटाफट से इसको इंक्रीज करो, अदरवाइज यू माइट डाई. एंड वो सिग्नल किस फॉर्म में आता है? वो सिग्नल यूजुअली आता है हंगर पैंग्स के फॉर्म में.
Dizziness, hunger pangs, feeling low in energy, headaches.
So Exactly. So what will happen is कि we will then suddenly we will have a huge craving for something sweet or something even more processed or something. So it's a vicious cycle. So when you start your day with a breakfast that is extremely high in carbohydrates or starch, you will have a crash, and within 2 hours you will feel hungry. And that hungry, you're not feeling hungry because you're actually hungry. You're feeling hungry because your body is sending you a distress signal that your blood
Yeah.
sugar is too low.
Yeah.
You need to eat something immediately, and us samay, your brain is not going to tell you to eat protein or fats. Your brain is
Whatever
going to tell
it
you to,
is, just quick.
yeah, your brain will actually subconsciously push you to eat a junk food, because that will give you again an immediate blood sugar rush,
Yes.
right? And so it's a vicious circle, and then you basically your entire day you can't get out of this vicious circle. So that's why the importance of breakfast is very high if you want to stay metabolically healthy, and especially for kids, make sure that you give them steady energy source when they start their day.
That would be the perfect head start. So if you could redesign the average Indian child's day, what would it look like?
Yeah.
As a good key takeaway for mothers, young mothers.
Yeah. Look, like I said, start with a really good healthy breakfast. Depending on your dietary preferences, vegetarian, non-vegetarian, I think there are plenty of good sources of starting with. Ideally, you start with a high protein breakfast. So if you are non-vegetarian or if you are vegetarian, then you should. I think eggs is a great way to start your day. But I can also tell you, egg is not the only way to get high protein. I mean, there are days when I don't eat non-vegetarian food, and that day also I still manage to get at least 30-40 grams of protein in my breakfast. And I can tell you the recipe of my favorite vegetarian breakfast. I basically take some yogurt. You can take Greek yogurt or any form of
Yeah.
1 cup yogurt. You put chia seeds in it, put hemp seeds in it, you put flax seeds in it, you can put a little bit of cacao if you want, and then I usually put a scoop of a protein powder also in it, and then top
Yeah.
it off with some banana. So
Perfect.
and
Yeah.
this is roughly 30 to 40 grams of protein, and it's extremely filling because all of these seeds, they are extremely rich in good fat, and they
Good
are
fat.
also high in protein. And then if you add a protein scoop, then it becomes even protein rich. And that's typically how I start my vegetarian days, with a breakfast like that. So ऐसा नहीं है that vegetarian people can't be on high protein diet. They can be, but of course it takes a little bit more effort, as compared to non-vegetarian, because non-vegetarians, I think, if you eat meat, then it becomes easy, to get your protein from that source. For vegetarians, you have to put in more effort, but there are more sources than protein. I mean, in fact, my favorite vegetarian protein source is actually not paneer; it is soy. It's soy. So अगर आप soya देखेंगे तो soya में has roughly 50% protein content होता है उसमें, and you can do so many things with soy. You can use it in breakfast. You can make like egg bhurji, like you make egg bhurji. You can make soy bhurji. You can make dishes with it, sabji with it. It's actually a really good form of protein. So you have soy, you have paneer, you have tofu. There are other more fancier things as well. For example, there is seitan, and there is tempeh. Not so common in India, but again, you will find them in some specialty stores. But within this, you can, and then of course you can always supplement with a scoop of a protein powder, right? So if you imagine, if you incorporate some of these 4 or 5 items that I've mentioned in each of your meal, you can very easily have 30-40 grams of protein in each meal. And that is how I would structure a meal, not just for kids but also for adults also. That's how we are supposed to eat. We were not supposed to eat we were not supposed to get 70% of our calories from carbohydrates. That's not how it should be.
I see most of the Indian households now shifting from samosas and vada paos and saying we are having oats ka chila. What is your view on that?
Uh, Look, oats ka chila, or oats in general, oats has some higher protein than your typical, let's say, wheat or rice. So it is definitely better than that. But 70% of the calories in oats are still coming from carbohydrates. तो
Yeah.
अगर आप डायबिटिक हैं, या अगर if you have blood sugar related issues, or if you're pre-diabetic or insulin resistant, oats is not a free pass. Oats will increase your blood sugar levels, maybe slightly less than roti or rice, but you have to understand that it is a grain. It belongs in carbohydrate category. 70% of the calories of oat come from carbohydrate. So
Correct.
it will increase your blood sugar level. So it doesn't get a free pass if you have some form of metabolic syndrome. If you do not have a metabolic syndrome, then it is perhaps a better grain to incorporate in your diet because it has better protein content, for instance. But again, it's not that कि आप अपनी daily protein requirement oats खा के meet कर सकते हैं, right? You will have to eat so much oats for that it is, I
Yeah.
don't think, practically possible, and in the process you will increase your blood sugar so much that it's not worth that effort, in my opinion.
थैंक यू फॉर सेइंग दिस आई थिंक इसका तो रील बनाकर जाना चाहिए बहुत सारे ग्रुप्स में वेयर आई नो पीपल ब्रैगिंग अबाउट आई हैव शिफ्टेड टू ओट्स चीला सो वी वुड डू दैट and we are going to a little bit focus on the teenage and the PCOS crisis, as you very rightly
Yeah.
mentioned about it in the beginning. It is a huge crisis in India now, and PCOS is something I also feel very bad. The the younger lot, it has also become a fashion statement, so to say, that everybody is okay and cool about PCOS. Everybody is like, yeah, PCOS, she has, yeah, my all friends have. This has to change. Whenever I
Yeah.
get into a group of young women and, young managers, and they're like, yeah, four of us have, and I want you to exactly talk about it, how important it is at a younger age to look at the parameters that can cause. And how does one identify? Most of them have one common answer whenever I get into some details. It's heredity. That becomes the
Uh,
past. What do you have to say for
Actually,
it?
हम खाली पीसीओएस को लेके नहीं, हम काफ़ी चीज़ों को लेके ये बोलते हैं कि हेरिडिटरी है, वे हम डायबिटीज़ को लेके भी यही बोलते हैं। बट एक्चुअली हम हम डिजीज़ की जब बात करते हैं, हम सोचते हैं कि हेरिडिटरी है। हम कभी हेरिडिटरी को एसोसिएट लाइफस्टाइल से क्यों नहीं करते? मोस्ट लाइकली आपका लाइफस्टाइल भी तो हेरिडिटरी है। मोस्ट लाइकली जो आप आज खा रहे हो वो आप पिछले 15-20 साल से खा रहे हो बिकॉज आपने अपने पेरेंट्स को वो खाते हुए देखा एंड आपके पेरेंट्स ने आपको वो खिलाया, उनके पेरेंट्स ने उनको वो खिलाया। तो एक्चुअली हम खाली डिजीज पास ऑन नहीं करते, हम लाइफस्टाइल भी पास ऑन करते हैं फ्रॉम वन जनरेशन टू अदर, एंड दैट
Correct.
लाइफस्टाइल देन manifest itself in a disease. So it's not that PCOS or diabetes is hereditary. It is the lifestyle that was passed on to you that is hereditary, and that is causing the PCOS or diabetes. So that's maybe how I would like to start off with. Now, specifically talking about PCOS, it's actually it really worries me a lot because I also have a teenage girl as well, and it's something that I think about a lot. In India, there is a study that shows that 20% of the women in India have PCOS,
Yes.
and I think this is a very conservative estimate because again, काफी females को पता भी नहीं होता, right, until the symptoms become very apparent, and so it's this is a conservative estimate in my opinion. It is much more than that, but let's stick to that number. 20% is still very high, right? 20% of all women in India have PCOS. And by the way, PCOS is getting younger and younger. There was another study that was done that pointed out that that this is becoming extremely prevalent in teenage girls as well. So
Yes.
it is getting younger and younger. And PCOS has its roots in insulin resistance. In fact, insulin resistance and PCOS are so tightly interlinked. Insulin resistance is one of the most common causes of PCOS. In fact, 70% of PCOS cases are caused because of insulin resistance problem. And iska, I will, without getting too scientific, I will try to explain, the mechanism of how this happens. Typically, what happens is when you become insulin resistant, then like I explained to you earlier, you have now your insulin levels are chronically high in your body, right? Now, when your insulin levels in a female body, when they're chronically high, what happens is that it promotes the production of androgen. Androgen is basically similar to male hormone like testosterone. So typically, so that is directly facilitated by high insulin levels in female body. So आपके insulin levels chronically high होते हैं, which pushes your androgen levels to go up, which means that you now have more testosterone like hormone in your body, right? Which is not normal for females.
Yeah.
That's why insulin resistant. That's why PCOS females में आपको male pattern balding दिखेगा, या you will see facial hair. That's exactly the reason, because they have high level of testosterone in their body. So that is one way, but that it doesn't end there. What usually जब हमारी बॉडी में ना काफ़ी सारे फेल सेफ मैकेनिज्म्स होते हैं. तो अगर फीमेल बॉडी में टेस्टोस्टेरोन एंड्रोजन हाई है, तो हमारे लिवर एक एंजाइम प्रोड्यूस करता है, उसको SHBG बोलते हैं, सेक्स बाइंडिंग ग्लोबुलिन हार्मोन बोलते हैं. वो टिपिकली क्या करता है कि वो एक्सेस, जब हमारी बॉडी में एक्सेस टेस्टोस्टेरोन है अगर फीमेल बॉडी में, तो वो उसके साथ बाइंड करता है एंड उसको इनएक्टिव फॉर्म में ले आता है. बट इंसुलिन रेजिस्टेंस फीमेल्स में क्या होता है कि वो SHBG की प्रोडक्शन जो है वो कॉम्प्रोमाइज हो जाती है. सो नाउ they not only have high testosterone, they have high active form of testosterone.
Oh my God.
And then what insulin resistance does is that it also actually usually for female for menstruation, there is a FSH to LSH ratio that has to be maintained. Insulin resistance उस ratio को भी काफी disturb कर देता है. And then lastly, मैंने आपको शायद पहले बताया था, insulin is a growth hormone, right? Now PCOS, which is called polycystic ovarian syndrome, इसका जो polycystic part है, that is also very directly impacted by insulin resistance, because जब insulin resistant होता है तो जो cyst form होता है वो उसकी वजह से होता है, because the ovaries are not able to fully form the follicles, and follicles की जो growth है वो impaired हो जाती है, which is where the polycystic part comes from. And by the way, very recently, as recently as 2 weeks ago, PCOS का नाम change करके उसको metabolic, आपने सुना होगा, उसका नाम has now they've renamed it completely to reflect the true nature. अब उसको metabolic syndrome बोला जाता है, right? Metabolic syndrome associated PCOS, something like that.
Here,
So
my
that
next question. That's right here, my next question.
Yeah, so that is exactly the reason,
Why
because
do you think there
because
is metabolic. Yeah.
because it is the underlying dysfunction is metabolic, which is insulin resistance problem. So all of these different mechanisms, these 4 mechanisms जो मैंने आपको बताया, high androgen, low SHBG, high insulin levels, this all combines, and it's a vicious cycle. जब ये formation होती है, what happens is कि इसकी वजह से women also tend to gain more fat, especially in the visceral area. That's why you will see that PCOS women also gain weight, and when you with more visceral fat, it makes insulin resistance even worse. So it's a vicious problem basically. So and this is a huge problem, like you said, and it is there are studies that will tell you that that PCOS can not only be managed, but also it can be reversed by lifestyle interventions. For example, there is a study, and I'm forgetting the name, but you will find that in my book. There was a study that was published where PCOS women were given low carbohydrate diets. So essentially reducing the amount of carbohydrates in your diet and increasing protein and fat content. And that tremendously helped in not only reducing the weight, which of course positively has a positive effect on PCOS, but also it brought the insulin levels down. And once the insulin levels stabilized, these functions over a period of time started to stabilize, and a lot of women actually were able to get back their menses and stuff. So it's definitely manageable through simple lifestyle interventions. Eating less carbohydrate, let most of your calories come from protein and fats, and also incorporating strength training, for example. So activity plays a really big impact. So has a big impact not just on PCOS but in general in your metabolic health, because हमारी बॉडी में, मैंने आपको स्टार्टिंग में बताया था, that 70% of the glucose is consumed by our muscle cell. So अगर आप strength training करेंगे, which I have given a full protocol in my book, अगर आप strength training करेंगे तो what happens is कि आप अपनी muscle mass increase करते हैं, right? So now your body has more storage capacity.
Correct.
Plus आप जब मसल्स को यूज करते हैं तो आप उनमें जो स्टोर्ड ग्लाइकोजन है उसको भी डिप्लीट करते हैं, तो आपकी मसल्स खाली भी हो रही है, सो दे कैन टेक more glucose and they can store more glucose. So strength training has a profound impact on improving metabolic syndrome because of these reasons, and even in improvement of PCOS, if you actually make these lifestyle dietary changes and if you incorporate strength training, you can actually see a lot of improvements by these simple lifestyle interventions.
So it is so easy, it's nothing to be scared of. If you are at the onset stage of PCOS, then you need to include, let me just try to wrap it up for somebody who is watching this right now. And I will ensure all these I'm talking about, I can see everyone's face. I'm going to, you have to watch this conversation. So, for example, Karan, if we have to make it easy for somebody is a young 24-year-old girl, right, with PCOS, with a lot of depression, because now whatever you're doing, you're not able to lose weight. You want to fit into your best dresses, and you're not able to. So, it also kind of impacts self-esteem. At a very young age, you
Of
want to
course.
enjoy your life, you want to feel good, you want to look good. And with the social media and social media world, everything is about, first is how you aesthetically you're able to present yourself. So to this 24-year-old girl, what she should do from tomorrow?
Control your carbohydrates. If you can eliminate them for at least for a while, you will actually see a really profound impact. Typically, it is called keto diet, for example. Keto diet is used therapeutically for a lot of such metabolic disorders. So control carbohydrates. If you can't cut carbohydrates, then control your carbohydrates. Prioritize protein, and don't fear good fats. Incorporate good fats in your diet. If you are able to do these three things, what you can do to push further is that you can also incorporate. Uh, so what we eat matters, but how frequently we eat also has a profound impact. So if you are
Correct.
able to incorporate fasting in your routine, that will also have a really big impact. Because what happens is that when we don't eat, if you're not eating, then our glucose levels will stay stable, and obviously there will be no need for our pancreas to produce insulin, right? So your insulin levels also stabilize. So if actually fasting is a really good way to normalize elevated insulin levels. If you do prolonged fast, I mean, a lot of people do intermittent fasting. Intermittent fasting can also be good, but you typically need anywhere at least 16 hours of no food for your blood sugar levels to completely normalize and your insulin levels to completely come down. And then if you push your fasting window from 16 to 24 or if longer, then you will actually your insulin levels in your body will normalize, and normalizing those insulin levels will have a huge impact on improving your PCOS. So, but again, fasting is not for everyone. That is why that is the fourth thing on my list. The first is to control carbohydrates, prioritize protein, eat good fats, incorporate good fats. And if you're able to do these three things, then you can perhaps do long fasts. Let's say 18 hours to 24 hours, once a month, once a week, depending on
Once a
how
month,
you're able to
once a
do
week.
it. In addition, if you can, you should incorporate physical activity. Any physical activity is good, but if you are looking for the best physical activity, then strength training will give you the maximum benefit. like
Maximums.
i like I explained, because when you do strength training, it will give you, there are studies that will tell you that it's for metabolic improving metabolic health, strength training is even better than doing cardio, because of the simple logic that your skeletal muscle is the biggest glucose sink in your body. If you increase your muscle mass, and if you deplete your muscle mass often, you will be more insulin sensitive, and that will hugely impact your metabolic health. And we haven't talked much about stress and sleep, but stress has a very meaningful impact on your metabolic health. Uh, if you are stressed because of your PCOS condition, or in general, if your stress levels are high, your cortisol levels will always stay high, and that will have an opposing effect on insulin resistance. So you also want to learn to manage your stress levels, improve your sleep, and these simple things can actually have a very meaningful impact, not just for someone who has PCOS, but in general who's struggling with metabolic dysfunctions.
Thank you for explaining it so well, Karan. Your views briefly on certain questions that have appeared in many conversations. As you rightly, your initial thought was that a disease is not something that has happened to you today. It is a result, it is manifested result of all the abuse that has happened for a very long time. And another very important thing that you said was that if we are happily taking everything as heredity, then we are not really taking lifestyle as heredity. I
Yeah.
mean, people behind us, they used to really walk a lot. They didn't have Blinkit and Instamarts or all the apps that are there to send food at home. They used to be very active, doing things, walking, and everything was a part of our life, which is not. So um, we have to really intelligently see how heredity plays, and if it is heredity, then how we are different from what our innate generations used to do and how we are doing it differently. So lifestyle again comes as a very important keyword here. Um, as you rightly said, they are never built. They are built. All these diseases are built silently for years. What mistakes in our 20s quietly become disease in our 40s? If you were to just give names of some diseases.
Oh, look, all the disorders, or at least most of the disorders that I mentioned up until now, if you look at, diabetes, that typically starts to show up in your late 30s or, early 40s. It is getting younger and younger, but typically, that's the time frame when, diabetes would surface. If you look at cardiovascular disorders, again, it's getting younger. The age of getting a average heart attack in India is 10 years lower than rest of the world. So in the rest of the world, an average age of a heart attack is around 63. In India, it's 50. It's come down to 53. So heart attacks are getting younger and younger. Younger people are getting it. But again, as you get into your late 40s and 50s or 60s, that's when the cardiovascular impact starts to show up. And then, in your 60s and 70s is when your neurodegenerative disorders kind of start to show up, right? That's when you become, and perhaps it starts as something as simple as that you feel forgetful or confused, but then, it manifests itself, in a full blown dementia or Alzheimer down the line. So these are typically the diseases which show up in most cases, after 30s, right? But
Yeah.
the foundation of these diseases were laid in your 20s. So what you do in that decade is is really important, and it will have a very meaningful impact on how you feel in your 40s, 50s, and 60s. So and like I explained, the progression is not just
Very slow.
is super long. It's not few years, it's decades. Insulin resistance can be there for 10 to 15 years. There are studies that have proven that insulin resistance can be there for 10 to 15 years, and you will not even know because it doesn't have any apparent symptom. It's not that you're you will feel it. I mean, you can feel it, but you have to be really, really knowledgeable, and you need to have a eye for detail to know. So for example, and I think maybe we should talk about this because this could help a lot of people. For example, having these energy crashes in the afternoon, having these sugar cravings,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
actually
Early signs, right?
that's early sign of actually that potentially there is some level of insulin resistance there. In some people, you will see that otherwise they're fine, but you will see that their skin around their neck starts to get a little bit darker, and that's very common actually. By the way, you would find that darkening of skin happening around neck area usually, or sometimes you see these small skin bumps which again form typically around neck or groin area or underarm area, and these are some early symptoms of insulin resistance. It's a pity that most people don't know this and they live with this for years. They think that that 3 p.m. crash is totally fine. They think that this darkening of skin, sometimes people mistake it as that it's maybe a hygiene thing, or most people are not able to relate to these small skin tags that appear. But
Yeah, yeah,
actually you
yeah.
can you can very easily detect insulin resistance at an early stage with these visible symptoms. They don't cost anything. You can just see and you can tell. And there are more things. Your waist circumference is a extremely good tell of insulin resistance. If your waist, and there is a harmonized
Waist and hip
criteria for
ratio?
it. Waist and hip ratio, I think, is ideal, but typically, in India, it's said that for men, it's if your waist is more than 90 centimeter circumference, waist circumference is more than 90 centimeter, and for women, if it's more than 80 centimeter, it's potentially a sign of metabolic dysfunction. Basically, that means that you have more fat around the visceral area, right? That's what it means. But actually, the best thing to look for is waist to height ratio. So your waist should be half of your height essentially. So let's say that you are, I don't know, 170 centimeters tall, then your waist should be 85 centimeters or below. That's a really good
Oh,
tell
that's a
essentially.
very good marker.
Yeah.
Easier to
So yeah, you can. So this is again, it doesn't cost anything. You can keep a track of your waist very
yeah,
easily, right? And if you have a huge waist circumference, it tells you that you have a lot of fat stored in your visceral area, and that is that has a bidirectional relationship with insulin resistance. So it's a very good tell. And then of course there are other markers like high blood pressure, for example. 50% of high blood pressure cases are caused because of insulin resistance problem. So if you have high blood pressure, which would typically start to, you would start to see in early ages. That's again a sign that you should get checked. PCOS we discussed in women, and erectile dysfunction in men is again a very telling sign of insulin resistance problem. So it's not that it is completely undetectable, but it's just that you have to know these things, and that's why I like to talk about these things, to create more awareness that people should check themselves. These are some clinical symptoms or clinical signs, but then you can, to be 100% sure, I think you should get your blood work done frequently, at least every 6 months and not just an annual checkup. And in your blood work, you should not, you should of course, check blood sugar and HbA1c. But like I said, blood sugar and HbA1c only goes up after 10 to 15 years. So
When the damages happen, yeah.
when the damages happen. So if you want to be proactive and if you want to be preventative, then what you should check for is your fasting insulin levels, because fasting insulin levels tell you directly about the level of insulin in your body, right? So it's a simple test for in most labs will do it. It's under $500, and you want your fasting insulin to be below 5 ideally, and that's optimal. 5 to 7 is considered to be good, and above 7, is above 7 is basically insulin resistance. So fasting insulin you should get checked. There is another test called HOMA-IR. HOMA-IR takes fasting insulin, fasting glucose, and it gives you a HOMA-IR score, which is again a very good marker for identifying insulin resistance. And then lastly, we all get our lipid tests done. But like I said, in lipids, we focus so much on cholesterol and LDL, whereas what we should actually focus on is your triglycerides to HDL ratio. So take your triglycerides number and divide that with your HDL number. You ideally want that to be, for optimal metabolic health, below 1. 1 to 1.5 is okay. 1.5 is early resistance, and 2 and above is insulin resistance basically. So when you are in your 20s, in that decade, you should these are the things that you can do to, first of all, detect whether there is some form of metabolic syndrome or not. And if you find yourself on that spectrum, then it's far easier to reverse that at that stage than waiting another 10 years and trying to reverse diabetes. It's far easier to reverse it at the insulin resistance stage. Without pharmaceuticals, you can make the lifestyle intervention changes that we discussed earlier, and try to control that syndrome at a very early stage basically.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Karan. I have reached the last segment of our discussion today.
Of course.
This is such a detailed conversation. I mean, you have referred so many research papers in your book also. I mean, you cannot really justify in one conversation everything, but thank you for explaining it so well. I'm trying to understand how to fix a sick nation now from you, from the author's mouth. And you have addressed most of it. So let me quickly take your view. And okay, so Karan, we have a segment called Viewers' Choice Questions. These are the questions that are floating around on the internet very frequently, and people are still asking because somewhere they are not getting the answer, or they are not getting the satisfactory answer, let's say. So we try to pick such questions and put it to the experts who we invite on our show. First question, brief, quick answer on this. How do I know if I have insulin resistance?
The surest way to know is to get your fasting insulin checked. And like I explained, you want your fasting insulin levels to be below 5 for optimal health. 5 to 7 is okay. Above 7 is early resistance. Above 10 is definite insulin resistance.
What is the best test for insulin resistance?
Fasting insulin.
Just fasting insulin, get it done, understand between, if it is less than 5, you're good, continue with what you're doing. If it is between 5 to 7, it is danger zone, right?
5 to 7 is okay. Above 7 is considered above 7 is insulin resistance basically. So below 5 is
above 7,
optimal.
the
5 to
damage
7
is
is okay.
done.
Above 7.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you're in that 5 to 7, say you are 6, what is it that you should do immediately? Course correction.
Simple things like we discussed earlier. Nutrition, what you eat has a profound impact. How you move, how often you move has a profound impact. So try to optimize your nutrition by focusing more on protein and fats and consuming less carbohydrates in your diet, and try to move more. And if you want to be more selective, then try to do strength training, which would have a very good impact, and try to manage your stress and sleep. That will have the maximum impact.
How many hours would you suggest? Everyone has different hours for sleep.
The research will tell you that anywhere between 7 to 9 hours is optimal for metabolic health.
9.
7 to 9.
9. Come on, Karan. There are people who are spending 2 hours just to reach offices. 9 hours. You really need to be
Well,
rich to be able to enjoy 9 hours.
I must tell you, there is another study that I've mentioned in my book, which found that one night of poor sleep actually makes you 30% less insulin sensitive the next day. So,
Just the next
sleep
day.
has a this the next day. It has a huge impact on your insulin sensitivity. You want to be insulin sensitive. You don't want to be insulin resistant. And if you don't sleep well, even in the acute level, it has a impact on your insulin sensitivity the next day. So sleep is actually really, really important. If you can't get 9 hours, that's totally fine. Research would anywhere from 7 to 9 is good. So try to get at least 7 is what I would say.
Yeah. Can insulin resistance be reversed? Yes or no?
100% it can be reversed. It's very, like I said, it's not very easy, but I would say it's not that difficult as well. You can reverse it at the earlier you catch it, the easier it is to reverse it, and you just need to make the lifestyle changes that we discussed to reverse insulin resistance.
Can thin people get diabetes?
Of course, there is a term called thin fat Indian phenotype, which basically means that you might look thin from the outside, but we tend to store a lot of our fat in the visceral area, which is around our tummy, and that fat is an active metabolic organ, and it has a huge impact on our metabolic health, simply because that fat actually makes your insulin resistance go worse. So you might look thin from the outside, but you are storing fat at the wrong places, and you're storing fat around your organs or on your organs, and that would cause metabolic dysfunction.
Again, yes or no? You have explained it very well. Is PCOS reversible?
Yes, 100%.
Is rice bad for blood sugar?
Rice will give you blood sugar spike, no doubt. It's a carbohydrate and it's a grain. 70% of the calories in rice come from carbohydrates. So it will definitely, as it is digested, it will raise your blood sugar levels. You can try to minimize that rice by combining it with really good sources of protein and fat, which will give you some relief, and which will give you a more moderate blood sugar spike. So whenever you eat rice, make sure that instead of putting more carbohydrate like a dal on it, put something which is extremely rich in protein and fats. What you can also do with rice, which I have experimented, and I've on my Instagram as well, I've posted it. You can actually cool down the rice. So if you cook rice today and if you put it in the fridge for 24 hours, and if you consume that rice, it will give you a much lower blood sugar spike than freshly made rice. Simply because the starch in the rice, it goes through degradation, and once it's degraded, then it will give you less blood sugar spike, because it is converted less in glucose, essentially. And this is not just my opinion. There is also research around this to support it. I've tested it on myself, and it gave me roughly 30% less blood sugar spike as compared to freshly cooked rice.
30% is a lot. So can this happen to
Yeah.
all the food items?
No, it depends on starch to starch. But in the case of rice, I've tested it extensively. It works quite a lot, quite well, actually.
Refrigerate for a day and then have it.
Yeah. Yes.
Does walking after meals really work?
100%. I've actually cited a test that I did on myself in my book. I did an experiment where I had my standard dinner. It was two chapatis with some dal and some sabji, and one night I had that, and my blood sugar went up by roughly, I think, went up to roughly 140 milligrams per deciliter or something like that. I don't remember the exact numbers, but something around that. The next night, I had the exact same meal, in the exact same proportion, and the only difference was that instead of sitting on my couch and watching Netflix, I actually went out for a 20-minute walk, and my blood sugar rise was roughly 20 to 25% less as compared to the previous night. So walking has a very profound impact. In fact, if you
After
are
meals.
unable to after meals, yes. In fact, if you are unable to do, let's say, strength training or exercise, I think this is one simple habit that anyone can incorporate in their routine, which is walk for 20 minutes after your meals. And the logic behind that is that when you are walking, your muscle cells, they are able to absorb that excess glucose much more easily than resting muscles. So you have a gentler blood sugar spike.
Sure. What's the biggest health myth Indians still believe?
Oh man, there are so many. I have to
Just the
really think
top
about this
four,
one.
five.
I think the biggest myth is that people think that ghar ka khana is healthy, and yes, ghar ka khana is healthy, but then what matters is that what are you eating in that ghar ka khana, right? If 70% of your calories in ghar ka khana are still coming from carbohydrates, then it's not so healthy in my opinion. So a lot of Indians, we think that मुझे डायबिटीज कैसे हो गया, मैं तो घर का खाना खा रहा था,
Exactly.
खा रही थी, या मैं तो वेजिटेरियन हूँ, मैं शुद्ध खाना खाते हैं हम. The metabolic syndrome, diabetes, or other metabolic syndromes, they do not discriminate between ghar ka khana, bahar ka khana. They discriminate between what are you eating
What I
in that what is on your plate actually, right? That is what
Yeah.
matters. And if you are eating roti, rice, and bread all the time, regardless of whether वो घर में बना है या बाहर बना है, it will have the same impact.
Sure. My closing question to you: if every Indian family watching this could make just one change tonight after dinner, what what should be there rather?
I've already said go for a walk. So after your meal, walk for 20 minutes. But one more thing I will tell you is that try to have at least 3 hours of difference between your last meal, which is your dinner, and your sleep time. That will have a huge impact on your sleep quality. Uh, if you go to sleep with a high elevated levels of blood sugar, it will it will have a direct impact on the quality of your sleep. So if you give a difference of 3 hours, so I have a kitchen closing window of 3 hours implemented at my home. So we close our kitchen 3 hours before we sleep, and the simple logic is that 3 hours is enough time for your body to digest that food, and also for your blood sugar levels to normalize. And when you go to sleep with low levels of elevated blood glucose and insulin, you will have much better sleep, and having better sleep, as we know, has a huge impact on your metabolic health in general, and also on your next day's insulin sensitivity.
Wonderful. Karan, I cannot thank you enough for giving
Course.
so much of knowledge in just one conversation. I hope it reaches as many people and it reaches the right people who really need this guidance at the right time. So,
Of course, it's my pleasure. Thank you so much for taking the time and asking all the right questions. So I've really enjoyed speaking to you.
thank you.
Thanks.
Hello and welcome to the PVT Show podcast. I am your host, Poonam Vijay Thakkar. On this show, I bring to you conversations with leading authors and top leaders who energize the mind, challenge the norms, and awaken a purpose. It's all about conscious growth with one powerful book and one powerful story at a time.